Welcome to the Steering Change Podcast, navigating through the commercial transportation industry in Alberta and beyond, powered by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Here's your host, Kelsey Hipkin.
Hello, friends of Steering Change. Automation is here, and that includes the commercial transportation industry. In today's episode, we welcome Wayne Scott, Senior Director, Transport Maintenance with Loblaw, and Rich Steiner, VP of Government Relations and Public Affairs with Gatik AI. We're going to explore what autonomous really means, including from a safety perspective, and what it could mean for the future of industry. We'll also touch on advanced driver assistance systems and a hydrogen pilot Loblaw is conducting with Hyundai. Let's get started. Rich, Wayne, welcome to the Steering Change Podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to start with an easy one for you guys. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves? I'm going to start with you, Rich.
Sure, happy to. And really appreciate the invitation to be here today. So, Rich Steiner, I am Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs at Gatik. I've been with the company for almost 7 years now at this point. Prior to Gatik, I was working for the Ontario government for a long time. So I've been working in and around the policy and politics realms for longer than I care to remember at this point. Prior to Gatik, I had a full, thick head of blonde hair, and things have gone clearly downhill from there. So I'll tell you about Gatik obviously as we go through, but I handle the legislative and regulatory portfolios for the company. So I see our government relations work across Canada and the US. So working with lawmakers and regulators to ensure that we have a legislative and regulatory framework and landscape in which we can actually deploy our autonomous trucks. So getting the opportunity to work with all levels of government and huge amounts of different stakeholder groups, including first responders and local elected representatives, city officials, and so on, making sure that we have a space in which we can deploy our autonomous trucks safely and efficiently for businesses and communities across the continent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rich. And Wayne, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do with Loblaw?
Yeah, I'm not that eloquent as far as Rich goes, but Wayne Scott, Senior Director, Transport Maintenance. Been with Loblaw since 2007, so going on 19 years this year. Predominantly what I take care of is the health, safety compliance within Loblaw, ESG, and some of the other duties as assigned is this Gatik project that we've been partnered with probably since 2019. Been in the industry probably best part of 42 years. My background has all been in supply chain, transport, trucking. Started at Freightliner as a mechanic back as an apprentice back when I was 18. And then I worked for Freightliner and Freightliner Corporation, and then went on to the fleet side probably in 2002. Working for Challenger Motor Freight, and then moved over to Loblaw.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And we're going to delve into the work that Gatik and Loblaw are doing now. But you caught my ear there, Wayne. The two of you have been working together since 2019. Can you kind of share with us how that kind of relationship came about, how you two found each other?
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation because back in 2019, we have an investment firm that, is part and parcel of our corporation, Whittington Ventures. And being the only real truck guy, equipment guy in the company, my boss came to me, my CAO, and said, hey, listen, Whittington Ventures wants to look at, some VC like investments and so on and so forth. We want to look at this autonomous vehicles. So we reached out to, a lot of companies who are no longer around. We flew out to California, Jim Orlando and myself from Whittington Ventures. And we met up with two companies a day. And, we sat down at the end of the day and kind of discussed, the pros and the cons and the goods and the bads. And at the end of the week, we came up with Gatik. And they were the ones that we thought were going to be the ones would pull through, just their business model, what they were looking at. They were very specific in their process. They didn't want to do a great big shotgun type scenario, but they were very specific in what they were looking at. We thought, here's a company who's very focused in their agenda and their vision. And I think we partnered up in 2019, predominantly more on the Class 5 Ford vans. And then we've gone on to that business is left Loblaw. I mean, we don't do the class 5 anymore, and now we've expanded into the class 7s.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wayne. And that's going to take us to you, Rich. With the work that Gatik is doing, can you tell us a bit about Advanced Driver Assist, or ADA, and how that ties in with the work that you're doing?
Sure, happy to speak to advanced driver assistance systems, but I'll say right off the bat, there's a huge difference between advanced driver assistance systems and autonomous vehicles, which is what we do at Gatik. So just to give a little bit of background, maybe for listeners, in terms of where Gatik sits in the autonomous transportation space, before I get to ADAS versus AVs, there's a bunch of acronyms for you. So if you look at the landscape of autonomous transportation, one end of the spectrum, you've got companies going after long haul goods movements, so integrating automated driving systems into Class 8 big rigs. So, looking at big payloads, highway operating environment exclusively, long distances, highway speeds. The other end of the spectrum, you've got companies going after delivering a small payload to someone's doorstep. So B2C, right? So delivering, say, a pizza or a bag of groceries to a consumer household. Where Gatik lives and succeeds right in the middle. So we do regional network automation. So we have a fleet of vehicles which delivers goods between distribution centers, warehouses, so locations that consumers cannot access inventory, and retail locations where they can pick up goods. Why does anybody care? Why is this important? Why does this matter? If you cast your mind back, say, a few years, 10 years, you enter your order online and you get a message that says, your goods will be available for pickup in a week. And you think, oh, yeah, sounds reasonable. If you get that message today, you'd be pretty upset, unless the message comes to you with something along the lines of, your goods are ready in 3-hour pickup window. You're not best pleased. So the whole universe of transportation has changed drastically on that front based upon consumer need. COVID really kicked that into high gear. So why am I telling you this? Because said simply, to make that system work, to keep consumers happy, you need more trucks, more trips, and more drivers behind the scenes on short haul routes. That's the regional piece that Gatik does to deliver goods quickly, efficiently, ensure that goods are available closer to home, higher frequency. So that's where we come in. That's what we do. And in order to make that work, autonomy is our secret sauce. So I know I've sort of skirted around your question a little bit, but I wanted to provide the background on the company and exactly what it is that we do and how we do it. So whereas advanced driver assistance is systems designed to assist the driver with various aspects, for example, steering and speed. So think adaptive cruise control, think blind spot monitoring, these types of systems, which of course are useful, but ultimately they all require constant human supervision, and the human is in charge of the vehicle. So useful safety features, which you find on both cars and trucks these days, but the human is in charge of the driving task at all times. Critical piece there to point out. Whereas what we do is level 4 automation, meaning that our autonomous trucks can operate in a given area. So, for example, within what we call our operational design domain, or ODD in the biz, meaning that we set out the parameters for the vehicle to operate within certain routes in certain areas, certain times of day, certain weather conditions, right? That's all fair game for defining the environment, but no human is required. So to sort of paint maybe a better picture, our customers, so Loblaw, for example, will say, hey, Gatik, we need you to move goods between distribution center A and retail location B, because that's where you can be most useful to us. And then we define the safest route between those 2 points, and we are responsible for making the truck operate without a human on board. And that's really the key piece here between advanced driver assistance system and automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles. For us, level 4 automation, there is no human required. And that is where we can deliver the value to our customers.
Thank you so much, Rich. And you've done a really good job of painting that picture. Let's make it even more granular. Can you break down point A? What does it take to get that vehicle from point A to point B? Is it people? I mean, obviously people are loading it up at a given location. What does that kind of process look like?
Sure. So there is still a human component in, as you just highlighted, the fact that you need a human to put goods in the back of the vehicle and take goods out of the vehicle when it arrives at the destination point. But the on-road portion, so the truck moving from point A to point B on public roads, and we operate in Ontario with Loblaw. We operate across the US, so Texas, Arkansas, Arizona, Iowa, Nebraska, multiple different markets with different customers. And these routes are constrained, they are repeatable, they are predictable. So that's very much by design within the context of our use case. Autonomy is not an easy problem to solve. And credit the vision of our founders at Gatik with this philosophy, with this thinking. The more you can constrain the challenge of autonomy, make a complicated problem simple, the quicker you can safely commercialize a product. So we move goods, as I've said, with no human being on board the vehicle between those 2 points. In order to get there, and this is perhaps a bit more to your question as well, this doesn't happen overnight, right? Safety is not a race. This takes time to achieve. We've been around for 10 years at this point, so it's important to point out this is not a science fiction project in someone's garage in Sunnyvale, California anymore. This is a well-established, deeply integrated product across multiple customer supply chains here, and we go through an enormous amount of testing, verification, and validation before we see a driverless truck. So sort of case in point, I'll speak to our operating model with Loblaw on that front. To Wayne's point, we began working together in 2019 and incredibly proud of our partnership with Loblaw. We began operating with one vehicle before expanding to multiple vehicles on multiple routes. Prior to operating one vehicle, millions of miles are run in simulation before operations on a private closed course test track, so not on public roads, with a human operator on board, before operating on public roads for Loblaw, with a human operator on board, with autonomous mode engaged, before finally operating truly driverless without a human being behind the wheel of the vehicle. So there's multiple phases to get to that sort of holy grail moment. None of this happens overnight, and there's an extensive amount of work undertaken as well with local partners. So whether that be provincial, municipal, the first responder communities, to make sure that everybody that needs to be engaged in this process is engaged.
Wonderful. And Rich, you had mentioned weather. I'm thinking Ontario particularly. Is there a certain temperature or storm or something that you're on the lookout when it comes to weather?
Yeah, so we've spent 6 winters now in Ontario. Wayne can tell you about all the challenges in the logistics sector when you're dealing with Ontario's winters, and I know in Alberta you get some pretty rough conditions as well. So having spent those 6 years of operating on Ontario's roadways throughout fairly inclement conditions, we're talking snow, we're talking freezing rain, we're talking heavy fog, we're talking all kinds of weird sort of ice storms, very strange and difficult stuff. We have really been able to mature our technology to some pretty impressive levels to be able to cope with fairly inclement weather. So light snow, fair game. Fairly heavy rain, fair game. If you've got 7-foot snowdrift right on the roads, we're not operating through that, right? And frankly, I would argue that human drivers really shouldn't be either.
Absolutely.
So when you're talking heavy conditions, potentially very hazardous and dangerous, that's not something that we're operating through. But again, we have certainly been able to mature our technology to a pretty impressive point with fairly inclement weather.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. Now I'm going to switch over to you, Wayne. Since 2019, you've had some time with Gatik. Why autonomous for Loblaw, and how is it working incorporating it in your fleet?
You know what? When we started off in this venture back in 2019, we were strictly looking at our Class 5, Ford vans, Ford Q vans, and we did this for a specific project as we wanted to do a proof of concept on it. And then as Gatik grew and we started looking at, they started looking at Class 6, 7. And then, of course, the Ontario government then steps in and says, we will allow up to Class 7 now on the roads. We went back to Gatik and said, hey, listen, the Ontario government, is now allowing this. Let's take a look at Class 7 deliveries. So, it's no secret that in this industry, drivers are getting harder and harder to find. There's an incredible backlog or shortage of them right now in the industry, and it's not getting any easier to find and hire drivers. So the whole purpose of this is, taking a look at what the future looks like. And the average age of a driver out on the road now is probably in their mid to late 50s, and nobody's backfilling these jobs. So we need to ensure that we get our groceries to our stores in a timely manner and consistently every day. So we're looking at Gatik to help us out with that distribution center to store that dependable, repeatable routes. So the goal right now is to have 50 Class 7 vehicles on the road this year with drivers in them, with safety drivers in them, learning those routes, that dependable, repeatable route. So they're going to go from our distribution to our store and return and then reload. And if they got to go to store A, B, and then back to distribution center, that's what we're going to do.
So Wayne, in conversations with Terry Johnson, who heads up our industry advancement department here at AMTA, as well as autonomy, there are some other trials that you're involved within. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, you know what? The one thing about at Loblaw is like we're constantly looking to the future to see what it brings, and we're heavily invested in battery electric vehicles in our ESG, in a reduction of our carbon footprint. We'll have 27 Class 8 trucks on the road by the end of this year, which will be the largest Class 8 electric BEV fleet in Canada. We're currently working with the AMTA on a pilot with Hyundai Translate trucks to turn around on a cab over hydrogen Class 8 truck out of Vancouver. We're running that up into Squamish, Whistler, Marathon, and a few other cities up that way. And these are just certain things that we're doing, and we're actually rolling it out into Alberta in the next. I think we should have something in. It's not quite May yet, so I think it's coming in May. So next month.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wayne. And for our listeners, we will have details on Gatik. We'll have details on the Hyundai trials that Wayne just mentioned. So make sure to check out the show notes for those. Let's get into the future. Wayne, you just mentioned it. Rich, I'm going to stick with you. Where do you see industry, loaded question, headed in the next 10 to 20 years?
So, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I mentioned before that this is not a science fiction project in a garage in Sunnyvale, California anymore. And it's not just Gatik, right? There are now multiple companies that have been at this for a significant length of time. Different use cases, as I mentioned, you've got companies going after long-haul transportation, the regional network automation, the business to consumer, so straight to the doorstep business model, multiple different variations on a transportation theme. But we're now at a tipping point as an industry. So I think that's where I go with this. At Gatik, we have over 100 vehicles commercially deployed now. That number is going to go way up into the hundreds and thousands over the next couple of years. And so when you're talking about 10, 20 years down the line, autonomous trucking is something that will be incredibly commonplace. Already for us, and this is certainly true running driverless deliveries for Loblaw, true in other jurisdictions as well, but no surprise that at the outset of these deployments, some heads are being turned, right? It's novel, it's new. A truck with no human behind the wheel is not something that most people get to see every day. I've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? I'm in it, I see it, Wayne's seen it a lot. And so we know, but it's still somewhat new to certain communities and certain places. 10, 20 years down the line, heads are not being turned anymore, right? At Gatik, we have an impeccable safety record with our automated driving system engaged. The industry at large has a very, very strong safety record in the trucking sector. And safety is something that we haven't really talked about on this podcast, and I really do want to touch on that. Beyond the beyond the commercial benefits of autonomous trucking, which Wayne and I have spoken to. So, Gatik supporting Loblaw with increased efficiency and higher frequency of deliveries, increased reliability. Wayne, very rightly touched on the driver shortage issue, which is very well documented and becoming increasingly acute. Gatik can help solve for all of those problems. But I also want to touch on the safety component as well. We're helping to reduce fatalities and serious incidents on Canadian roadways and American roadways, with every single run that we do. So 10 to 20 years down the line, in addition to the increased commercial benefits that we're offering Loblaw and other customers as we scale up, and those benefits just compound as we grow, we're also seeing a very genuine, increase in road safety and autonomous trucks across the sector, really helping the industry to become more responsible in the logistics space, right? So there's a lot to look forward to in the next 20 years as far as autonomous trucking is concerned. And I always like to say that it's an evolution, not a revolution. Right? This is not happening overnight. You're not suddenly going to see 1 million driverless trucks tomorrow. That's not how this is going to work. So it's a slow and steady incremental expansion done at the right pace, delivering benefit for Loblaw as we go. And as far as our operations in Canada are concerned, we've really demonstrated what we can do in Ontario. And for folks out there in Alberta, we certainly look forward to being able to bring our solution across the country as well as we grow. So 10, 20 years down the line, lots of good stuff happening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. And thank you especially for touching on the safety piece. So Wayne, you have lived and breathed commercial transportation. I believe you said you started out as a mechanic. So from the time that you started to where you are now, where do you see industry in the next 10 to 20 years?
And I just, when I started this industry back, 40 something years ago, not a lot has changed, right, for the majority of it until we got into battery electric vehicles. That was probably one of the biggest changes that I'd seen. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be buying hydrogen vehicles, I would have said that that's ridiculous. Now I'm looking at autonomous vehicles and rolling that out. I just see this whole industry in the next 10 years as being some of the biggest transformational change in an industry that we haven't seen in the previous 30 years or 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Pistons, engines still ran the same way. They still run the same way. We got different emissions on them. I got it, but it's very similar. Tires are black and round. Some things just will not change. But with, I'll say, BEVs, the zero emission vehicles, hydrogen, autonomous, I just see this industry just massively changing. But yeah, you know what? It's really interesting to see where this industry has been and where it's going to. I've never seen anything like this, and it's just incredible. It's really incredible to be a part of it as well. To work for a company that's allowed me, that is looking to the future, and running, pilots with solar trailers and e-axle trailers and hydrogen trucks and, investing in, battery electric vehicles. And now after, 6-7 years with Gatik, we're looking at putting Class 7 trucks on the road. It's pretty phenomenal.
Awesome. Thank you, Wayne. Okay, fellas, we are going to wind her down a bit, but I do have one last question for you both. I will stay with you, Wayne. Is there anything you'd like to add on our conversation today?
I just think where I see, some of the future and some of the misunderstandings of autonomous is that people see these out on the road, and not as being safe vehicles. Rich has brought up the fact that they are safer. I think if you take a look at a lot of the NHTSA stats and that, they're involved in far less major accidents, across the U.S. If you take a look at Waymo potentially coming into Toronto this summer, if you've ever got the chance to get to Toronto and try it out, I've been fortunate to try these out in a few cities in the U.S. already. They're pretty incredible. And you know what? They drive better than most of the drivers on the road currently right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne. And Rich, anything you'd like to add?
I think I just close by, I want to thank Wayne. I want to thank Loblaw. Loblaw has just been such an incredible partner to work with over the past 6, 7 years. Wayne, in particular, hard questions have been asked of Gatik as well they should have been, and as well they should continue to be, right? I think Loblaw's really helped to push us in all of the right ways to become better partners, to really understand how we can integrate into Loblaw's supply chain in a safe and effective way. And just want to thank Wayne for all of his advice and guidance and support as we've grown together. And to Wayne's point, as we look to bringing the next cohort of 50 larger autonomous trucks to the Greater Toronto area, serving upwards of 300 Loblaw storefronts, I believe. I mean, this is segment changing stuff, right? Industry changing stuff. So to Wayne's point, it's really exciting as we grow together and do this work. So want to thank Wayne and appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today. So I hope the listeners have enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Rich, Wayne, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight with us today.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, friends, let's follow up with some AMTA news. Today is the final day to register for AMTA's Professional Truck Driving Championship, taking place May 30th at AMTA's Edmonton International Airport location. Whether a driver or volunteer, please visit the events tab on amta.ca and keep an eye on our socials, and we will see you on May 30th. Do you have any questions or comments about the Steering Change episodes? Please do reach out on our Instagram at AMTA_CA or LinkedIn and Facebook at Alberta Motor Transport Association. Stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of AMTA's Steering Change podcast. The views expressed by guests of the Steering Change podcast are their own and may not reflect the views of AMTA, its hosts, or sponsors. Did you have a question that you would like answered on an upcoming episode of the Steering Change podcast? We want to hear from you. To submit a question to the Steering Change mailbag, hit up our DMs on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the hashtag Steering Change, and your question will be answered either live on the podcast or by one of our SMEs here at AMTA. We ask that you share this episode with those in your network that could benefit from what we discussed today, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform so you can be notified when future episodes are released. You can learn more about us and our mission by visiting www.amta.ca. Now get out there and have a safe day.